kinds of complements possible. Oops, got it. There are also other kinds of complements possible with these verbs. So see and hear can also take a to infinitive complement. It's sometimes called an inferential reading. It has a special kind of reading. It's not really perception anymore. So you can say, I saw Sam to be an excellent orator. And notice that these allow passivization quite straightforwardly. Sam was seen to be an excellent orator. It's very natural. Very many examples of this can be found in corpora as well. So basically, and what's also interesting if you look at these to infinitives is that whenever you have a to infinitive, they're always full TPs, and so then you can have all the auxiliary verbs. So in 7a, you can say something like, I saw him to have been being bullied, right? So here you can have, because you've got a full TP projection, you can then have all of the other aspectual projections underneath it. So this is a kind of a sort of a peeling analysis of clause structure where you can sort of peel structure off, but once you've got the highest bit of the structure, you can also have the heads in between. So some slightly different proposals were made yesterday, actually, interestingly. So in 8, you can see then what me and Sonia have claimed about the types of complements we get in English with these kinds of verbs. And crucially, the see here inference type is different from the others in that it's got a to projection, right? It's got this TP projection. And that's going to be crucial in allowing passivization. Whoops. So let me explain how the analysis works. So we're following Julie Leggett's work in assuming that even in passives and unaccusatives, there's still a VP related phase. So voice or prog is still going to be a phase head, even in a passive. And we adopt the second version of the phase impenetrability condition. I had it on the slide, but then I took it off because it's very difficult to process. Basically, this is the version whereby a phase, or the complement of a phase head, is transferred to the interfaces, not as soon as its features have been satisfied, but rather when the next higher phase head is merged. So what this really means is it doesn't really change anything about A bar movement, actually. It just changes the way that A movement works. And so the main corollary of it, the main effect of it, is that local A movement then doesn't need to transit through the phase edge. And that's because there's a window of opportunity for A movement. So if you look at the tree in figure 1, basically what this means is that this is a phase head, this voice auxiliary. But at the point at which T is probing for something, for an argument, nothing has been spelt out because we've only got one phase head in the derivation. And in fact, the complement of this phase head, this little VP, will only get spelt out when C has been merged, right? So this means that we've got this window of opportunity where we can move, where T can agree and attract things across a phase head effectively. So it allows for a movement to cross a phase head. And this means that restrictions along passivization, this means that basically we don't have to move through the edge of this phase, right? So in PIC 1, with a stricter version of the phase impenetrability condition, we would have to move through the edge of this phase. But in PIC 2, we don't. And that's kind of crucial. That's why I'm kind of laboring that point. So restrictions on long passivization show, I think, this is what me and Sonia have argued, that A movement not only need not, but actually cannot transit through the phase edge as an escape hatch. So notice that we're not saying that if you have to move to that phase edge for other reasons, then that can also lead to then you being able to move on. But the idea is that you can't just kind of use it as an escape hatch, right? That's the claim that we're making. I'm interested to take your objections to this because it's sort of a hotly debated topic, but that's the basic idea. So once we have all of that in place, we can see how this can explain the restriction on long passives with bare verbal complements in English. And here's the proposal in a nutshell. So remember that you can't say something like they were made fall or they were seen fall. You have to say they were seen to fall. And that is basically because this is now a configuration where we've got two phase heads between the T that's probing and the goal that it's trying to get to. And although the PIC allows us to probe past one phase head, it doesn't allow T to probe past two phases. So once we've merged this higher phase head, the idea is that the complement of the lower phase head will no longer be active in the derivation. And so we won't be able to attract and move any of the arguments of this bare verbal complement up into the matrix spec TP position, right? So in a sense, A dependencies in the second version of the PIC can cross only one phase head, right? And that only follows if we have PIC2 and also a ban on moving through phase edges. Because obviously if we could move through the phase edges, there would be no ban here. We could just move here and then here and everything would be fine. So we want to try and keep that ban in order to capture this restriction and also to capture the fact that A movement is much more restricted than A bar movement, right? That's presumably the main difference between the two kinds of movement. Okay, so that's a sort of basic analysis of English. So why does it make a difference if you have a 2 in between in the structure? So remember that in 10A, you can say something like Kim was made to fall. So once you put 2 in, it's fine. Why would that make a difference? Well, the crucial thing here is that once we have a TP in this embedded complement, we have an EPP feature in English and in some other languages at least. So the idea here is that once we've got this T projection, it's going to attract the highest argument of the bare verbal complement into its specifier. And that effectively is going to feed the long A movement, right? So effectively you're moving it first here, and that just keeps it in the derivation long enough to be visible to this higher T probe, right? So if you see what I mean, so essentially you can A move over one phase head at a time, and that's fine. But what you can't do is move straight across 2 phase heads in this kind of approach because of the way that the PIC works. And we don't have a really great analysis of why you can only do this with the non-agentive predicates, but this is actually a more general pattern that Pazetsky has described for ECM. So you get these weird contrasts in English where you can have ECM when a verb is ambiguous between being agentive and non-agentive. You can have ECM only when it's used non-agentively. So you can say like, I remember him to be an excellent singer, but you can't say, remember me to be a good singer. So you can't kind of coerce, when you use remember as a kind of agentive verb, ECM's not allowed. So there is some kind of broader pattern that fits into. So that's the basic explanation for the difference, the patterns that we see in English. And you can probably see why I've used English, because it's pretty straightforward, because we've got this 2 in the structure, and it seems to be strong evidence that there's a TP projection there. So now let's turn to some Romance languages, as that's what we're really interested in. And we'll start first with Brazilian Portuguese. Just taking the time. So Brazilian Portuguese, as many of you definitely know, and probably all of you know, doesn't have clause union causatives anymore of the sort of familiar Romance kind. And it has rather ECM complements and inflected infinitival complements. This is something that some people here have discussed. So the normal way to have a causative with these predicates is to say something like 11. So a Maria fez os meninos cantar a música, or os meninos cantarem a música, right? And what the difference between the two is basically that when you have the inflection, you've actually got a CP complement, right? So there's some evidence for this. There's basically the evidence, some of it's given in 12. So one thing is that when you have the inflection, you can have embedded topicalization. So you can say, eu fiz a água todas as meninas beberem, but not, eu fiz a água todas as meninas beber. And we also get rid of semantic restrictions on the causae. So you can say, eu mandei as madeiras chegarem cedo, but you can't say, eu mandei as madeiras chegar cedo. So you can't kind of, that's because when you use the uninflected infinitive, you've got a kind of a smaller structure, and rather than a CP complement. So you keep some of the sort of causative semantics. So the basic analysis that me and Sonia propose for Brazilian Portuguese is that the reason why you can passivize, what we observe is that only some uninflected ECM complements allow passivization. So you can never passivize an inflected infinitive complement. And that's presumably because they're CPs, right? So we would expect if something's a CP that it's going to be a phase, and so we won't be able to have long passives for the same reasons that we've just seen with the bare verbal complements. Should have actually put a tree for that, but sorry. But what we can see is that even if we forget about inflected infinitives and just think about the sort of bare infinitives, we still can only passivize with the verbs mandar and deixar. So You can see this in 13. Os meninos foram mandados comer o lanche, right? And what we propose is that these are actually TPs, right? So you can see that in the structure here. So again, the derivation would be exactly the same. We're moving the highest argument of the embedded complement clause to this TP position, making it visible to the matrix T. So that's fine, but is there any evidence for this? Well, there is some evidence, yes. So in Portuguese, really, the evidence comes from the semantics, but there are actually some syntactic things that I probably could have mentioned as well, but I've just mentioned a couple of things here. So the first thing is that the same verbs, deixar and mandar, which allow long passivization, also fail to kind of behave semantically like causatives. So they don't impose event simultaneity or veridicality on their complements. So, for example, you can say in Brazilian Portuguese, ontem o Pedro deixou as crianças viajar amanhã, right? So you can deixar someone yesterday to do something tomorrow, which you can't do in European Portuguese. The same thing with mandar. And likewise, you can also say something like, eu mandei as crianças estudar o livro, mas elas não fizeram isso. So you can have someone do something, but they don't actually do it. So this is sometimes called the veridicality entailment. So in a sense then, mandar and deixar in Brazilian Portuguese don't really behave semantically like causatives, but they also differ from object control verbs. So, you can say something like, o que eu mandei foi os meninos ir embora. So they are causatives that are taking a clausal complement, as opposed to like verbs like persuade or convince, but they also don't have all the semantic properties. And this would follow if they take a TP complement. Let's just consider deixar, because deixar is a bit different. As Jackendorf points out, the veridicality entailment is reversed with deixar, with let type verbs. So I let her leave does not entail that she left, but I didn't let her leave entails that she did not leave. And so this is something that's definitely different between Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese. So it's okay in Brazilian Portuguese to say, eu não deixei as crianças viajar, mas eles viajaram. Whereas in European Portuguese, that would be strange, because if you didn't let them, they wouldn't be able to do it. So this follows if veridicality results where a single T head scopes over two events, so they're kind of inextricably linked. Whereas when you have a TP complement, it kind of defines another tense domain, and so gives rise to more independence between the two events. And so in English and Brazilian Portuguese, then what we've proposed is that TP complements feed long passivization. Okay. There's a remaining problem though, which Sonia and I didn't really notice until more recently, which is not in our 2018 proceedings paper, what we're discussing in a paper that we're writing now, and that's to do with the verb vir. So this verb seems to be different in that it seems to allow long passivization only as long as its complement is unaccusative. And this is a pattern that we'll find also in Spanish and European Portuguese. So I'm interested in people's judgments, especially if you don't agree with any of these judgments, by the way, so please do say or send me an email. So os meninos foram vistos sair is okay, but os meninos foram feitos sair is bad, according to what we found. So we propose that this is because vir is not taking a larger complement, it's not taking a TP complement, there's no evidence for that, but rather what seems to be the case is it's taking a smaller complement that's smaller than a phase, so something like a VP complement, and that VP complement lacks an external argument altogether. So there is evidence for that. So you can say things like, aqui vimos construir barcos, right, barcos. So I keep saying it in European Portuguese, just ignore that. So this actually has, this actually has the properties of a VP. That's what we have found out. So here's the evidence for that. So there's a minimal contrast here between mandar and vir. So remember that the complement of mandar in Brazilian Portuguese is bigger, it's a TP, right? Whereas the complement of vir can be a VP. And the evidence for this comes from the control, right, in this example. So if you have something like, a Maria mandou entregar todas as tarefas para poder passar de ano, then with mandar, it has to be the people who are handing in the assignments who will be passing the year. Whereas with vir, it has to be her. So in a sense, when you have mandar, there is a syntactically projected argument of entregar, but when you have ver, there is no syntactically projected argument because it's a VP complement. So this suggests then that the complement of ver, when it takes these kinds of strange complements lacking an expressed causee, is actually a VP, right? It actually lacks an external argument. That's the analysis of Burzio for Italian, for sort of the parallel Italian examples back from the 80s. And so the complement of mandar is larger, presumably a TP, as we've been arguing. And so that explains the sort of different semantics of these two examples. Okay, so let's move on to Spanish. How am I doing for time? I think I'm okay. So I've been interested in this in Spanish for a long time, and I've done lots of different things. And when I was trying to make these slides, I couldn't decide what to say. So I'm sorry if it seems like I'm just throwing lots of things into it, but I'm really interested to get your feedback, as there are so many Spanish speakers here who speak different varieties. So looking at the literature, and I'm just going to focus first on hacer, or hacer, but then I'll talk also about dejar and ver. So with hacer, it's been claimed that some people at least allow be passives with unaccusative and transitive complements, but not with unergatives. So here's some examples from the literature. So Juan fue hecho venir por Pedro is acceptable for Treviño in her excellent thesis. Este palacio fue hecho construir por el rey. This is the example that you see everywhere, and this is taken from Torrego's book. And then Turbino Blanco's excellent thesis and book, she also discusses this and notes that also that, well, yeah, and actually other people have noted that you can't say stuff like Juan fue hecho correr el maratón, right? That's really bad. So there's a clear contrast between these kinds of examples and this kind of example. But actually, many speakers from all over the Spanish-speaking world seem to reject all such examples. So some people actually don't allow 21A and B. So I'm going to sort of probe this a little bit further here and try to understand what's behind this variation. So first of all, here's some data taken from the now part, the news on the web part of the Corpus del Español. And this was collected by a student of mine just now in the summer. So here's the examples with hacer and dejar and ver. And these are basically all of the examples with, I think it's with 5 or more attestations with a single embedded verb. So it's not actually all the examples, but it's very many of the examples. So what you can see here in each column is all of the long passive examples with hacer by country. These are the countries in the corpus that have examples of this, and dejar and ver. And I've highlighted some things. The first thing we can note is that, it's quite widespread, these long passives. So although they may be rejected by some people, they might be a bit strange, they do occur, and it is part of this kind of journalistic style. I've highlighted some things because in Bolivia and Chile, we can see that the hacer passives are the most frequent, whereas in most of the other countries where there's a sort of strong skewing, we find the passives with ver are most frequent. So that's interesting. I don't really have an explanation for that. But and dejar is just used less frequently, I think. So they're just fewer examples. When we look at Bolivia and Chile in more detail, we can see that this is because actually there are some idioms that are specific to those countries. So the reason why there's such a big number here is just that there's a lot of examples with hacer conocer or hacer conocer, which is kind of an idiom to mean to tell someone something. And in Chile, there's lots of examples with hacer desaparecer, okay, which unfortunately is very frequent because of the things that they're talking about. But when we look at Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Spanish, and the US, we find a more diverse range of embedded verbs. So maybe it's more productive in these countries, although still the numbers are pretty small. This is a really big 72 billion word corpus, so the numbers are small, right? I mean, the numbers by language are still pretty small. So that's just a kind of a snapshot, really. And then if we look at a bit more about the kinds of examples that we find, what we find is that by far and away, the most common embedded verbs are unaccusatives. So you can see that here. So this is the examples by country again. And you can see that Bolivia and Chile are really the only ones that have a lot with transitives, and that's because of those idioms again. So most of the examples in all the countries are unaccusative verbs, and many of them are these three verbs, so salir, llegar, and desaparecer. So desaparecer, of course, can be either transitive or unaccusative, depending on the variety. But so you can see that here, some typical examples. So un Fiat 600 color blanco fue visto salir de la escena del crimen. Things are split apart in the corpus for just to make it easier to search it. And then fue hecho llegar and fue hecho desaparecer. So you can see that there's quite a lot of examples, and they tend to be describing the same kinds of things. Okay, so then what I've also done is to try to collect some survey data to see whether people's intuitions mirror this kind of internal external argument contrast that we're describing, that we've sort of found in the theoretical literature and also in the corpora. And in fact, it does. So this was survey data taken from 2 surveys. I had about 100 people in total filled them in, that they were split over 2 surveys because there were too many examples. And they're rated on a 5-point Likert scale or Likert scale, and mu stands for the mean acceptability, and omega stands for the standard deviation across speakers. So what you can see in 23 is that when we try to have a long passive with an external argument in Spanish, these are really bad. So, you know, getting this one just got just over 1. So basically nearly everyone gave it 1, and the same with this one. And the standard deviation is quite small. Whereas when we have an internal argument, either with an unaccusative verb or a transitive verb, these are pretty good. So the acceptability on a 5-point scale is usually around 3.5. Various things affect it, but the judgments are, I've got lots of examples, and they're pretty much all around the same. So el mensaje fue hecho llegar a 10,000 personas por el gobierno, o este edificio fue hecho construir por el alcalde. Right, sorry, there's an extra full stop there. So some of these are based on corporate examples, and some of them are based on examples from the theoretical literature. So we find strong support that that's true, basically. Need to go move on. So the fact that only internal arguments can undergo this long passivization in Spanish, for those people that allow it, suggests that only VP complements of causative and perception verbs allow passivization. So they seem to be of the sort of the ver type from Brazilian Portuguese. And what we know is that Spanish varieties vary with respect to the possibility of VP complements. This is what's been called the fair par construction by Kane and other people. So this is also from my survey data. So el alcalde hizo construir muchos condominios was accepted by everybody. So basically, you know, almost 5, and the mean acceptability task, maybe 1 or 2 people gave it 4. But if we add the byphrase, el alcalde hizo construir muchos condominios por compañías privadas, then it drops down to kind of the usual 3 point, it's a bit higher actually, but between 3.5 and 4. So as Paco pointed out to me before, unfortunately after I'd done the survey though, examples like this get better for many speakers if we add se. So if we were to say, el alcalde se hizo construir muchos condominios por compañías privadas, maybe not that particular example, but many of them do. So this needs to be carefully investigated, and I'm planning to collect some survey data on that and try to work out what that se is doing, but I'm going to have to ignore it here because I don't actually have the data on it now. So in my survey, all the speakers then accepted examples like 25 without the byphrase, whereas only between 60 and 75% accepted the examples with the byphrase. So I have lots of different examples, and it does vary from case to case. And there's also a greater standard deviation. There's more variation, basically. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, in previous work, also with Sonia Cirino, we noted that for some speakers who allow such examples, but only without a byphrase, they no longer have the properties of being a VP complement. So the null clause E actually seems to be syntactically projected. So you can see the evidence for this in 26. So el profesor hizo entregar las tareas para pasar el curso. And here, for many peninsular Spanish speakers that we interviewed, it is possible for the people passing the course here to be the ones who've handed in the assignments, right? So this is different from what's been described elsewhere and what we saw earlier with ver in Brazilian Portuguese, right? So it's equivalent to the mandar in Brazilian Portuguese. And so what we found, just working with a few informants, is that speakers who allow a by phrase will not allow the causee to bind pro. So that seems to be consistent with them having a VP complement. And speakers who do not allow a by phrase do allow the causee to bind pro. So that seems to be consistent with them having a larger complement with a projected argument of entregar, right? So however you want to analyze that. So this seems to make a prediction then. We've got all these things interrelated. So only speakers who accept the fair par construction with a by phrase should permit passives of causatives, right? So this is what now we're going to see the results of from the survey. So there is evidence for this correlation. I still need to do some proper statistics on these results, and I maybe don't have enough data actually to do that. But so if we split the people who accepted the example we saw in 25, so this example, into those who accept it with a by phrase and those who don't, right? Remember, everyone accepts it without a by phrase. Then there are 11 people who rejected the overt by phrase, and none of those people accepted the 3 examples of a long passive in their survey. So that seems to be exactly as we'd predict. Of the 31 people who accepted example 25 with a by phrase, right, who seem to have some, who seem to allow a true VP complement, 16 of them accepted all 3 long passive examples, right? So over half of them. But of course, there's still quite a lot of them who didn't, right? So the results seem to indicate that there are 3 different types of Spanish speakers. There's the speakers who accept the fair par construction, so have a sort of VP complement and allow long object passives. Speakers who accept VP complements but disallow long object passives, and speakers who reject VP complements and disallow long object passives. So groups 1 and 3 are kind of what we might expect if having a long passive means you have to accept a VP complement, but group 2 is not really explained. So there's something else necessary in order to allow long passives in Spanish. Is this a geographical split? I would love to get loads of data and really try to understand the sociolinguistic variables behind this. Initially,
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's fine. So it seems to be just the initial data that I have from these 100 speakers seems to suggest that there is a geographical effect. So the Argentinian speakers in the survey tend to be in the group which accepts VP complements and long passives. So they seem to be, and that I think fits in with what's been reported in the theoretical literature as well. And 7 of the 11 people who rejected VP complements and also rejected long passives are from Spain. So, but of course there are more Spanish and Argentinian speakers in the survey than people from other places. So we'd need more data to really assess this, and also to see the effects of other sociolinguistic variables like age, because my interest really is in whether this is a geographical dialect thing or whether it's actually really more of a sociolinguistic change that's happening, because it sort of seems that maybe these VP complements are kind of being lost, and there's kind of a tendency in Spanish and Portuguese for things to take larger complements. That seems to be what we see when we look at sort of the history of the construction and what other people have said about it. Okay, I've got 10 minutes left, which means I can talk about European Portuguese, which doesn't really make too much sense, but I can try to just go through what I kind of do understand about it. So this is just data taken from Gonçalves, 1999. So she notes that of the causative verbs, the only verb which allows long passivization in Portuguese is mandar. So it's quite restricted, long passives in Portuguese. Again, the example with construir gets wheeled out, gets yielded out. Gets wheeled out. So we get something like todos estes palácios foram mandados construir arquitetos italianos. Okay, so this is the example that you see everywhere. You can also do this with unaccusatives. This is given a question mark by Gonçalves, but there are quite a few examples like this. So depois de fazer vários disparates, o João foi mandado sair da sala. okay? But what she also notes, which was again parallel to what had been noted for Spanish in the Spanish literature, was that you can't do this with an unergative verb like courir, for example. So 29C is bad. O atleta foi mandado correr, right? Even if you try to create a context. So it seems that mandar in European Portuguese seems to behave a bit like ver did in Brazilian Portuguese, and a bit like all of the causative and perception verbs seem to behave in Spanish in the dialects that allow long passives, which is interesting. We've got this internal external argument contrast. And in contrast, fazer and deixar can't be passivized at all in European Portuguese, according to her, and also Raposo. So o palácio foi feito ou foi deixado construir is really bad. And actually there are kind of no examples of this as well. So just to give you a treat to try and explain what I've been saying now about VPs, which I should have had earlier on, the reason why it's easy to see why a long passive would be possible if we've got a VP complement, right? So if you've got something like mandar and it takes a VP complement, then again, there's only going to be one phase head that's intervening between T and the arguments of that embedded verb, right? So we'd expect long passives to be possible, and that's in fact what we've seen maybe is happening with ver in Brazilian Portuguese and with the Spanish examples. So can this analysis also extend to European Portuguese? Potentially. First of all, I haven't tested this via a large-scale survey, and I would like to investigate to see if there's any variation. But certainly looking at the data in the Corpus do Português, it seems pretty clear that long passives of mandar are extremely common, actually, and seemingly also only with internal arguments. So the claim, that sort of theoretical claims again are borne out in the corpus. I haven't presented the data here because there's not time, but and so potentially this could be attributed to the fact that mandar can take a VP complement, unlike fazer and deixar. And there's other evidence for this. So, I mean, it seems to take that kind of complement. So you can say, os meus pais mandaram construir uma casa, right, as we've seen, but you can't say, os meus pais fizeram construir uma casa, or deixaram construir uma casa, right? So you can't use the other verbs in this way. So there is, again, the nice thing is that goes in, you know, the long passivization pattern, again, it seems to go hand in hand with being able to take this kind of VP complement. But there are some differences. So I'm just going to end by telling you why this isn't quite as neat as it could be. The first thing to note is that European Portuguese speakers don't allow an overt by phrase here. Really, as far as I've been able to find out, the ones that I've asked. But actually the covert causee does seem not to be syntactically projected. So it seems to be, a similar pattern is found in Catalan, actually. So you can say, a professora mandou entregar todas as tarefas para poder passar de ano. And here it has to be the professora who's passing the year, not the people handing in their assignments, right? So in that sense, it fits in with the idea that this is a VP complement. But there's a remaining problem, and that's that a dative causee can be there in a long passive of a transitive. So you can say, here we've got, you know, arquitetos italianos, that's a dative, and so we would expect that to be in an argument position. And the presence of a dative would suggest then that the complement of mandar here would have to be bigger than a big VP. So there's something that needs to be, something not quite right in European Portuguese. It seems to fit into the pattern, but then there's this added complication. So one possibility would be that this is not really a dative causee, and that's what's been proposed by Foley and Harley, actually, for some similar examples in Italian. They claim that actually this is more like a benefactive. So that would need to be investigated, really. Another thing that I should mention is that although European Portuguese mandar generally contrasts quite clearly with a Brazilian Portuguese mandar, there are some cases where it doesn't fully, and so that needs to also be investigated. So I'm going to conclude now. I've tried to show you that there's quite a lot of variation in complementation patterns with causative and perception verbs in Portuguese and Spanish varieties, and that even within the same language, complements which appear to be the same can actually be of different sizes, and we can diagnose this via different kinds of diagnostics. So this affects long passivization, and it's diagnosable by things like the fact that TP complements permit future reference and lack veridicality entailments in Brazilian Portuguese, for example. And the VP complements lack this syntactically projected subject, which we can independently show through the control examples that we've looked at across the languages. So patterns of long passivization actually can largely be explained by the phase impenetrability condition once we take into consideration these differences in size. And in a way, I'm quite surprised by how well things fit together. So I'm interested to look more at European Portuguese and also maybe to investigate more sort of dialectal variation, because we really predict that these kind of things should go together. And so there's a lot of scope to collect data, big data, and see whether that really is the case. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you, Michelle. Muito obrigado. We have time for questions, 15 minutes. Let me see. Joyce Matos, have a question.
Can you hear me?
Then Eloisa. First Joyce Matos and then Eloisa.
May I?
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Sheehan, I was thinking about something, and I'm going to give you a sentence, and you're going to see that it makes sense. See if you can translate this to European Portuguese. I'm going to paste it in the chat, okay?
Okay.
All of the palaces were made to be built by Italian architects.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. So of course, that whenever you have a biphrase with these long passives, it's ambiguous about, with respect to whether it's, you know, referring to the matrix clause or the embedded clause. So in this kind of example, my understanding is that that would be fine if it was the Italian architects who were the ones having the palaces built, but not if it referred to being the ones that actually built the palaces, because usually you can't have European Portuguese speakers usually don't allow that biphrase to be expressed. So you can't say something. So if you think of like not the passive example, but the active example, you couldn't say something like eu mandei construir palácios por arquitetos italianos. So you couldn't, as far as I'm aware, that's what's been described. But yeah, but that would be, so did you have a follow-on question from that, or were you getting at something?
I have another sentence, if I may.
Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So this is another really interesting thing that this is super interesting about Portuguese and Spanish, actually, that you can have, you know, really big complements of this verb as well, which is actually unusual, even in a Romance perspective. I think it's unusual. So you can't do it in as far as I'm aware, in French and maybe even in Italian. So are you asking me what my analysis would be of these examples? Exactly.
And also because I was thinking about this when you were talking about Maria and the singing and everything, that slide. And I thought that this would work for most of the examples that you were using. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Including this one, I'm going to paste it here.
Yeah. So these are obviously, I mean, they look like CP complements, so they're obviously something much bigger. They don't permit long passivization, right? So you can't say, obviously.
But are they CP complements?
Are they? Well, they look like they've got a complementizer, so that makes me. But yeah, of course
it makes you wonder, right?
I mean, it's unusual, yeah. So I guess what you're asking is, what is it about the semantics of
exactly. I think that the problem is semantic restriction. I know you're a syntacticist, and that's what we're talking about here, and you're coming from this point of view of faces and everything, but I think that if you look at it from a more semantic point of view, without it turning it into a semantic paper, you know, or a semantic study, it's still a syntactic study. But that would help you out with it, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure if it would help out with the particular issue of long passivization, because I think that seems to be something very syntactic. I think it is interesting that you can have CP complements. I mean, so you can't really do that in English. You can do it with the perception verbs, as we've seen, right? I haven't actually given examples of that, but you can say, I heard that John was coming through the door. And what's been shown by the semanticists is that they have a different interpretation, right? So even
But when you mentioned EPP features,
mm-hmm.
There's an EPP feature? I don't think so. I disagree. And if you disagree, then you can look at it from another perspective, because what if there is no EPP feature there? How would you solve that? How would you describe it? That's what I'm getting at.
I don't fully understand. So do you mean there's no EPP in a finite clause or in a non-finite clause?
Well, can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a look at it.
I guess you mean this example, right?
Yes, that's the slide.
Mm-hmm.
What if, let's try it for a non-finite clause. What do you think? No EPP feature there.
Okay, if there's no EPP feature, then you need another explanation for why having a T projection seems to feed the long passivization.
I think you need another explanation. That's what I was, getting at.
So there's been a lot of discussion about Brazilian Portuguese, whether it has an EPP feature. And obviously it's different from the EPP feature in English, if it does have one. But I think there's questions about whether it's really, whether it's a subject or a topic, and how whether you want to make that into a TP position or a higher position. So yeah, that's an important point to raise, actually, whether,
because I don't think anyone really knows what EPP is. So in a world without EPP, we would be made to search for better solutions. So that was really what my question was all about, with all those examples, all those sentences. I don't know if you agree with that.
Sorry, we have other questions.
Maybe we can be in contact. Thanks.
We have Eloisa and then Janaína.
Michelle, I was very pleased to attend your conference. Thank you. And it's a very relevant topic. And it certainly opens lots of questions and windows for understanding syntax and case and reanalysis. But the data that I would like to discuss are the ones involving this point you make about the absence of the subject projection with in examples such as em português, fez entregar o trabalho, né? Os trabalhos made, hand, the work to pass, né? To pass the exams, to pass the year. And then I agree that it's the correlation is impossible with the subject of entregar. And or rather, it is with the subject that you make the subject, the causer, that the relation, the co-reference is made. But I was wondering if we had something like fez entregar the work, fez entregar os trabalhos para agradar as pessoas, para in a more general meaning, with a more generic meaning. This should be possible. The co-reference with the internal argument, with the argument of the internal predicate, the embedded predicate, should be possible.
Okay, that's really interesting. Is that true with both verbs? So then the difference between mandar and vir kind of disappears? Is that what you're saying?
Vou entregar o trabalho para agradar para agradar as pessoas. I think so. I think there's no difference.
It could be. I mean, it's really interesting. I'd need to investigate.
Because I'm a bit skeptical on whether this argument is not projected, on this idea that it's not projected. syntactic
there are other, we have other arguments.
So the question would be, what would be the consequence for your analysis? The fact that the argument is projected.
Yeah, okay, it's a really good question. I think probably in the response regarding that example is that if you have something like para agradar as pessoas or something, it's more like the fact of handing in that's pleasing the people, probably rather than the actual. So it could be like the event itself that's
More
pleasing. So
yeah,
maybe that would be.
The other one is more episodic, I think.
Yeah, the other one, it kind of has to be one of the arguments, so it can't be the event that's passing the years. I think maybe that might, I mean, that would be worth investigating at least to see whether that could be. Sometimes it's difficult to tease apart what the different meanings, I guess. But yeah, I'd have to discuss that with Sonia as well. That's really interesting. It would be, I mean, that's kind of, yeah, it is. There are other arguments. So Burzio, as I'm sure you know, has lots of, you know, these properties of the fair park construction that have been documented by Burzio and Guasti and others. And actually, they do also show that there's a difference between mandar and ver in this construction in Brazilian Portuguese. So there are other things to do with idioms as well. So at least I can send you the paper. It would be really great to get your comments actually. But yeah, there are some other, it's not just this, I've just chosen this because I had the data across all the languages and I wanted to try to highlight the similarities. But I think there is other evidence that it's a VP. It's not so clear. So one of the things is that you can't have non-passivizable idioms in the fair par construction, right? And so that does seem to be something that differentiates mandar and ver in this construction as well. But yeah, thanks very much. I have to, it'd be great to get some examples actually, if we can, I'll send you an email and try to.
We discussed this before. Do you remember that? You sent me an email and then we talked about these constructions.
Yeah, right. I have to dig up that
some
email.
time ago.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, Anaína.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks. How are you?
Fine. I have 3 data points that I would like to comment on. The first one is that with C, when you have a passive and you say the complement can only be an accusative verb, if the verb is in the infinitive form, that's true, but you can have a verb em progressive form, a transitive verb in progressive form. So, os meninos foram vistos comendo.
Yeah.
So then you would be a phase. So how would you account for that?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question. I first was going to present the stuff about gerunds, because actually the same thing's true in English as well. So the gerunds are much more easily passivizable. And I think in Brazilian Portuguese, it's because they're never actually clausal. So it really, when you say eu vi os meninos comendo, you actually seeing them, you're seeing the meninos, and then comendo is like a secondary predicate. So you can see that from the fact that contrast, like you can see, you can't say something like vi chovendo, right? So you can't have something that needs a kind of a real clausal gerund in that position at all. In English, you can say I saw it raining, but what happens to be the case in English is that you can say I saw it raining, but you can't say it was seen raining. So in English, in the active construction, you can have either a clausal gerund or an object and a kind of secondary predicate, a gerund acting as a secondary predicate. But in Brazilian Portuguese, I think you can only have an object, because these verbs of perception, they love just having DP objects anyway, right? So I think it's in Brazilian Portuguese, it's always the case that you've really got a DP object and a secondary predicate. Although the readings are so similar that it's, we don't have strong intuitions about them. But once you apply these other tests, I think you can see that in Brazilian Portuguese, there is no clausal gerund in that position. And in fact, in argument positions more generally, clausal gerunds don't really work in Brazilian Portuguese, right? So that, yeah.
Okay.
That's a really excellent question.
And the other question is related to the passivization with mandar and deixar. I don't really like them. They are not ungrammatical, but they are a bit strange. So I was thinking about how many speakers like that, because when you presented the data from European Portuguese, it was much more aligned to my dialect in the sense that I would only allow the complement to be something like sair or any other inaccusative verb that would fit there.
Interesting. Yeah, in fact, I think you've actually mentioned that to me before and I remembered it and then I didn't ever follow it up. That is something that would be really interesting. Obviously, Brazil is a very big place and there are many dialectal differences. So we would probably expect there to be differences in the same way that we see differences in Spanish, right, at a sort of a lower level. I'd be really interested to look into it in, using surveys. I mean, again, the good thing is that there are predictions about what should go together. So it will be interesting to know, and I should send you an email, whether you have to share the judgments about whether they have the TP-like properties, these complements, or whether they're more VP-like. So it would be interesting to see whether the grammar is more aligned to what I've said about European Portuguese. That wouldn't really surprise me because I don't see this as being a kind of a geographical thing. I think there's just so much variation in the syntax that you'd kind of expect there. Yeah, I'd be really interested to look more into that. But yeah, thank you for reminding me.
And a final comment is that by phrase sometimes have some restrictions regarding to the type of passive you have. So in some language, by phrase do not combine with generic passives. So I thought maybe there is an intervening factor in these sentences, not that they are incompatible with by phrases, but by phrase don't like generic passives in general. So something like that.
That would actually be really good. Actually, I should think about that. It's a great suggestion because it's kind of strange really at the moment that you can have, that it seems that you can kind of, I don't know if it would work across Romance though, because there are lots of cases where the same kind of example works in French and Italian, but then doesn't work with an overt biphrase in European Portuguese. So then it would be strange if it was kind of a semantic restriction, but if it was a syntactic restriction on passivization in those languages, that would be excellent because it would remove, it would kind of clean up the picture a bit. So I might email you about that if that's okay. That would be interesting to think about. Yeah,
Thank you.
We need to email you anyway. So
thank you. Bye.
Thanks very much.
Michelle, a brief comment. I was wondering about the double-H extraction and long passivization, because for some people, double-H or A-bar movement in general allows for cyclic movement by properties of the double-H itself. So the prediction for those approaches would be that you can extract to an edge position first and then having long passivization. But that is incorrect. You cannot have a double-H extraction and long passivization. In my Spanish, at least, is clearly ungrammatical. So what would be your, how do you proposal would account for this ban of double-H extraction and long passivization?
Gosh, I didn't realize that existed. So you can't say something like, what would the example be like then? So you mean extracting from the raised subject or extracting from something else? Can you give me an example?
Like, ¿quién fue hecho, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I see, extracting the causee, right. Well, it could be, in Spanish, it could be because usually you can't have a causee. Okay, so that's a W, that is, yeah, so ¿quién fue hecho llegar? Or something like that would be bad for you. Ooh, didn't know that at all. Super interesting. That could be because, yeah, I don't know, I have to think about it. But I mean, the two movements would have different trajectories, right? So maybe by moving, I'm just making this up now as I go along, but maybe because quien has to move to an edge position, maybe it has to move kind of first before it would undergo the long A movement, right? And so it kind of, that would block it, but then that would raise the question of what happens in a normal, with a normal subject WH question. But maybe they don't move, right? I mean, that's, some people have claimed that. I have to think about that. I wasn't aware of that restriction actually. So it's super interesting and definitely very relevant to look into.
Yeah, I was wondering because of the distinction you made about double H extraction, or A bar extraction versus A extraction. So it would be interesting to combine both type of extraction in long passivization in causatives and see what happens.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
just curious about that.
I mean, it definitely is fine in English. Who was made to leave? It's perfect. So there's
Who?
not,
Sorry, who?
who was made to leave?
Ah.
Fine. Who was made to leave? Who was seen to leave? Yeah, but there are other weird restrictions. Like you can't really have A bar extraction of a causate in an active with English causes with English causative construction. So who did you make leave is a bit strange. So that they kind of have those same kinds of weird things that you get with ditransitives. So there is more to be said there about how that's explained. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it reminds me of another thing that I worked on with ditransitives. So I have to try to think about how it would fit in with that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. Beautiful presentation. And now we have to pass to her Mary Cato presentation. Mary, are you ready?
Yes.
Hola, Mary. Okay. And yeah, we are going to listen the case of strong pronouns and the deletion analysis of null subject for our Mary Cato from Unicam.
Andres, can you call my attention if I speak too low? Because normally when we have an audience, I get a mic, you know. So here there is no one to call my attention. So if I speak too low, please make me raise my voice. Okay?
Be okay.
So, good morning, everyone. Bom dia a todos. Thanks for this opportunity to discuss again the non-subject. And I have been working on the non-subject since the beginning of the parameter model proposition by Rizzi. And I realized that I have been working a lot, and I wrote many articles, including articles with Eugenia, who is here, Eugenia Duarte, and I realized that I never paid much attention to Japanese, and I am a speaker of Japanese, not only a speaker, but my first language was Japanese. I started speaking Portuguese when I was 6 at school. So I said, before I really retire, I think I should pay a little more attention to Japanese. And I always think about children learning languages. And it was something that really makes sense when I also include Japanese. So I will start with this emphasis on morphology and as a licensing condition for the existence of null subject. And it has been the strongest hypothesis, and especially with diachronic evidence to support it. So you have Tarot, San Diego, and Sapphire, and Brazilian Portuguese, you have Galvis, Inter alia. However, this hypothesis loses its generality when languages like Chinese and Japanese, well known for the lack of agreement morphology and with the possibility of null subjects, are taken into account. So a quotation by Yeagle and Safir 89 says, whatever the null subject parameter is, it has many subtle effects that no superficial theory will capture. So I'm going to return to this topic, the null subject, the existence of noun subject and try to is someone yeah. So the aim of this present paper is to discuss Cato's 2017 proposal that no subjects are defined by default case of their strong pronouns rather than the properties of inflection. And I propose that in that paper that that default case, if the default case is nominative, the language will allow noun subjects. So if you think English, which is a minus noun subject, the default case is accusative. So me, I think I'm intelligent. In French, you have the dative, moi, je pense que je suis intelligent. And Spanish, which is a noun subject language, you have yo pienso que soy inteligente. So it's nominative. And it also, this default case appears also in predicates in all subject languages, as Raposo 1992. So you have it's me, which is accusative, c'est moi, dative, and soy yo, nominative. So according to Rohrbacher, case appears when the element has no case assigned normally. See. Now I show that this default nominative case seems to be a better requirement for the possibility or a trigger for a language to be a noun subject. And I show that in Japanese, a language without verbal inflection is no exception. So it's a noun subject language and its default case is nominative. And it also fits, this proposition fits Borel-Chomsky conjecture. And so because what makes some variation possible is the difference in the feature of particular items. So in Japanese, you have the nominative case watashi, and the predicate in A you have I am. It's me. And so, since Japanese is head final, you have this order. So in B, what you have is topic, then nominative, intelligent, B, that think B. So you have the same sentence as we saw in the other languages. So you have nominative again. So the apparent pronouns in Japanese are actually addressed forms. So we are calling pronouns here, but they are actually addressed forms because you have watashi for first person, but you can also have boku, which is used only for men. So watashi is the formal address form for first person, so anyone can use it. And boku is only for men. And for second person, you have also kimi, which is the let's say less formal. And what was the the formal one? Anata is the formal one. So I never used these differences when I was a child because I didn't know how to use them. So I only used the name, my name. I used it for my parents or for strangers. I didn't use watashi or boku. If I was a boy, I wouldn't use boku. I would use only mari. I used, for me, I would use my name. So Japanese has address forms. So it's like in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, where the second person is você. Você is an old address form. It was vossa mercê, right? So vossa mercê became a third person. The second person, você becomes third person because all address forms are third person. They don't have distinction in person, right? So so this explains why there is no agreement inflection in Japanese and why Brazilian Portuguese você lost also the inflection. And imagine Brazilian Portuguese imperfect and conditional, where even the first person has no inflection, right? Though in this case, it doesn't mean that the difference has to do with the subject. So the present problem is Brazilian Portuguese, a language in the process of losing the behavior of now-subject languages, but behaving exactly like Spanish, Italian, and European Portuguese, all now-subject languages, with respect to the default case. So I say, sou eu, nominative. Eu acho que sou inteligente, nominative. Recall that contrary to Brazilian Portuguese, when French lost the properties of a now-subject language, it also lost the nominative default form and acquired the dative counterpart. See examples in Roberts, 1993. So you used to have je, je n'irai, ce ne suis, je mi, and after the change, you have moi, je n'irai pas, ce n'est pas moi. So it becomes modern, now subject language in present French. So the proposal is that Brazilian Portuguese should be considered a now plus now subject language with no expletives and with optional possibility of deleting the weak preferential subject pronouns. This has some differences between me and Eugenia, because Eugenia thinks that today Brazilian Portuguese should be considered a minus non-subject language. It will also be shown that free inversion considered as part of the non-subject parameter in the initial version is still partially maintained. So in order to solve this problem, we adopt the deletion analysis of null subjects in line with Perlmutter, Holmberg, and Roberts. So this solution leads, however, this solution of deletion leads to the following issues. A, what conditions allow referential subjects to be deleted, erased? B, where does deletion occur, in syntax or at PF? Right? But remember that the idea of PRO, it was necessary to have ways to license and identify the null subject. In the deletion analysis, we will also need the conditions to delete the pronoun. In Spanish and Italian, we use morphology for identification, and in Chinese, Japanese, we use control relations. We can say that with the impoverishment of its verbal morphology, Brazilian Portuguese will need not only agreement, morphology for identification, but also controlling antecedents. So many linguists have said the same fact. So you have, o Pedro disse que eu vou casar. O Pedro disse, here you have to allow deletion because of the morphology. You have vou, right? So it is indisputably first person. So Pedro disse para o João que estava doente, it has to be only the subject. So it has the control restriction. Now, in Cato and Duarte, 2021, this year, actually, at Abralin, was it Abralin? I think it was Abralin, that we analyze pronouns in first position and where you can have deletion at the beginning of the sentence. We saw the previous examples in 7 where the deletion was in the subordinate clause. Now here you have in the main clause, and you have here all cases where you can have deletion of the pronoun. So you can see that in all of them, you have some light element before the verb. So eu já trabalhava naquela época, você nunca ouviu falar nele, ele não aguentou o tranco, eu me tornei independente, eu sou brasileiro. So in all cases, you can delete the pronoun because you have already one element before the verb. I will explain this fact later, but the last one in E, eu sou brasileiro, I put a question mark because it can appear as a question, an answer to a question. De que nacionalidade você é? Eu sou brasileiro. Sou brasileiro. And normally what you have is deletion of the subject. Sou brasileiro for answers. But we can analyze this as not a deletion of the subject, but a sort of remnant movement when the verb moves to focus. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about this. We'll leave it for next time. So when you require control or morphological identification, as in example 7, deletion applies in syntax because you need those conditions exactly like the licensing of Pro, right? But in 8, I analyzed Brazilian Portuguese deletion as stylistic, the one that has the deletion at the beginning, the subject is in the beginning. As stylistic, having its place at PF. An analysis proposed in Cato and Duarte 2001, which will be now presented. According to them, optional referential noun subject is felicitous when a sentence results in a linear verb second, non-Germanic pattern at PF, with the preference of a short criticized element which includes the subject pronoun. So it has to do something that has to do with the linear order V1 or V2. In Holmberg and Mikani, they showed the following contrast, where you have play children in street. It's ungrammatical because it's V1. The second one, play children in street, it's verb second because you have cita, the expletive. I forgot to put the expletive below translation. In street, play children, it's verb second, so it's okay. So yeah, it's exactly the same restriction and that we found in the Brazilian sentences. The only thing here, what you have is inversion. Except for the existence of the lexical expletive cita, we may say that Brazilian Portuguese is very similar to Finnish regarding our free inversion contrast regarding V1. So here what you have is they all have inversion with something before, something some constituent or the expletive cita. So here I'm saying that in Brazilian Portuguese, also free inversion seems to be, we are losing free inversion in Brazilian Portuguese, but what remains is limited to an accusative verbs, and they also seems better if you have something before the verb. So then you have dormiram as crianças aqui is bad, but aqui dormiram as crianças is okay. There are people who don't like it, but it's okay because dormiram is not an accusative verb, but it's a negative. And there are people who prefer only an accusative verbs. Vai lá Maria, lá vai a Maria is good. Chove em São Paulo. We have noticed that in the news, when you hear news, instead of they saying chove in São Paulo, what people say is São Paulo chove. This example was found by my husband, who heard São Paulo chove, Rio faz sol. And he told me, did you hear what I heard? And he noticed that, and I just picked it from what he heard. So the V2 requirement found in Brazilian Portuguese so is similar to the ones found in Finnish indefinite constructions, in which an expletive theta is required with inversion when there is nothing in initial position. But notice that in Finnish there seems to be no restriction regarding preferential noun subjects to occupy the first position. So if you have now things went wrong, you need the expletive. But if you say, I speak English without the subject, it's okay. So you have verb initial here, but this is not an inversion. So if it's not an inversion, it's a normal SV order, then you can have the deletion of the subject. So it's a little different from Brazilian Portuguese, because in Brazilian Portuguese, sentences with SV order, you can have deletion if you have something, not the expletive, because we don't have this expletive, but if we have something like a negation or something, expletives. So contrary to Cato and Duarte, for whom deletion is proposed to occur at PF, for Homburg, in Finnish, if the sentence contains one or more categories that can check the EPP, then one of them must re-merge with IP, or an expletive must be merged with IP. So there is a difference because one occurs in syntax and for us it occurs in PF. As here in Cato and Duarte, we did not analyze the indefinite subject cases. We will leave the discussion of the difference between Finnish and Brazilian Portuguese in more details in future work. But I think that for indefinites, we also have this V2 restriction, because you can say, for instance, não usa mais saia in Brazil. Não usa mais saia is okay, but if you say usa saia nas bancas, it's very strange. So normally, why is it that we use so much você and a gente instead of the não? So instead of say conserta sapato, you have that in outdoors, but because it's written. But when you say something like that, you say você conserta sapatos, a gente conserta sapatos. So normally you fill in the first position. But we need to analyze data. So the final remarks is that we can say the following regarding the non-subject parameter. The first triggering fact for a speaker or child to decide whether his or her language is a non-subject language is the clue found in its default case, found in the beginning of sentences or in predicate position. And this is very common in child language. So if the default case is nominative, the language allows no subject. It doesn't say it has to have no subject. The language allows no subject. The no subject results from deletion erasure of referential pronouns or address forms. So it doesn't mean only pronouns, but also address forms. Deletion can take place in syntax motivated by morphology or by control. And languages with rich morphology use basically agreement morphology. Languages with no morphology or poor morphology resorts only to control. Brazilian Portuguese resorts to both. Deletion can take place at PF if at this level it has a -1 linear order. So this means that if the verb has some item, head or phrase in front of it, the subject pronoun can be optionally erased. That's all. Thank you.
Gracias, Mary. Thank you. We have time for questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
I think I have some answers for Mary with our presentation in a moment. But in any case, what do you say about the nominative case being a default, also as an accusative, Mary? Chamou eu de interessante, ou levou ela ao cinema, mandou eu para casa, beija eu, me beija. Então, default case in Portuguese is nominative, but it can be accusative, which is not it doesn't happen in Spanish, I believe. Ele beijou eu. Andrés, ele beijou eu. Ele beijou eu, ele mandou eu embora. So we can assume that in Brazilian Portuguese, nominative is a default. Eu não quero ficar mais aqui, ou ele viu eu ontem, ele mandou eu embora, ele mandou nós embora, in certain dialects, ele viu nós na rua, and with the causative sentences and all of them, we have even if we have exceptional case marking, it will be marked, but it will appear in the nominative form. The form is the same as the nominative. So if French has moi, je, we have eu as a nominative, an unmarked.
In these cases, do you have a moi in French for this case?
Not in French, like French used to have in the beginning, Old French. And I don't know if you have this in an accusative function.
Yeah.
But we can say that the accusative in Portuguese the nominative form can be in nominative, in accusative. So the default is still nominative. And it is also used to be in an accusative function. It's not so as an object, as a direct object.
The examples you gave in English and French, see if you have the default case.
In English and French?
Yeah.
No, you never have in English, he saw I.
De burro. He called me. Well, no, my English is not.
Okay, but in any case,
no.
Okay, in French, no. Moi, je. I don't think so.
Always accusative, right?
Okay, but in any case, I must remind you that remember that we compared Brazilian Portuguese with Japanese in the volume organized by Eloisas, the two Eloisas here. And we said that our no subjects were like Japanese ones, and our overt, anything fell? Oh, so our overt subjects were like English subjects, and the no subjects were like Japanese ones. That's what we said once. And in any case, it's good that you spoke now, because I have some things. My Eduardo and mine, we were worried about what we were going to present, but in any case, we have some answers. We will link our work, our paper with yours. Thank you so much, Mary. I love to see you.
Anaína?
Oi, bom dia. Bom dia, Mary.
Oi, bom dia.
Eu estava pensando aí sobre os expletivos, porque até no português europeu existe aí a ideia de que a gente tem expletivos. Então, quanto que a gente poderia relacionar os expletivos com o fato de ser uma língua de sujeito nulo ou não de sujeito nulo, né? Tem o expletivo aberto, que é o ele, né? Em alguns dialetos, aí eu acho que ele está acima de TP. E você tem algumas análises de sentenças como... desculpa, eu estou falando português, já foi. Você tem algumas análises de Ardeu as Florestas, né? No texto do João Costa e da Maria da Maria Cristina Figueiredo Silva, de que aí, quando você tem essa inversão, em vez de você falar as florestas arderam, você falou ardeu as florestas, é porque você teria um expletivo aí, por isso que não teria concordância. Então, o expletivo por si só, aí, não, como é que ele estaria ligado aí à questão da gente ser sujeito nulo, não ser sujeito nulo? Assim.
Mas eu acho que esse caso do aí, lá, que a gente usa muito na primeira posição para evitar V1, são locativos que são, como é que a gente fala isso? Já esqueci, estou esquecendo português. Então, eu acho que não é bem expletivo.
Entendi, porque eu achei que você estava falando que a gente tinha um expletivo nulo. Aí eu estava falando que o português europeu também tem, então daí a gente teria esse problema aí. Tá?
Para mim seria o locativo.
Tá bom. Obrigada.
Questions? We have a minute for a brief question. No? Well, sí, Michelle. Sí.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting, Maddie. It was really nice talk. I'm really interested in this linear order effect. I wondered if you could say a bit more about what you think. Maybe 1 minute's not enough time, but what that kind of thing that is, because it's really striking, but difficult to analyze syntactically, right? Is it really just a PF requirement or something syntactic?
We tend to analyze it as a PF requirement because in a way you have conditions at the beginning in syntax, either by control or by morphology, etc., because it depends on the deletion in syntax. But then you have something that restricts, the sentence is good until it gets to PF, and in the linear order, you tend to prefer V2. So that's why we also tend to fill in the pronouns, where it could be optional, but we tend to leave if there is nothing before the verb. So if there is nothing before the verb, you tend to put the pronoun. So that's more or less the idea. It has nothing to do with control or with morphology.
In a way, it's a good argument that it is a PF deletion analysis, because it seems like a PF kind of rule. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. For those that didn't know, some weeks ago, Mary and Charlotte Galvez had a workshop in honor to them. And in September, we are going to have a workshop in Bahia in honor to Maria Eugenia and Sonia Cirino. So it's good that you all are being presenting now, even because Michelle Sheehan was also related to work with Sonia. So we are very glad to have all you in our Romania Nova. Thank you. And now, Maria Eugenia and Eduardo, Patricio Resende. No, Eduardo. There are two Resendes, sorry. And Eduardo, yeah. Maria Eugenia Duarte and Eduardo Resende are going to present a posición estructural de sujeto en variedades do portugués. I will let you know when you have the 5 minutes left, Maria Eugenia. ¿Está bien?
Mary has to close it. Okay. Thank you, Mary. Because Eduardo has to put the...
Tá dizendo aqui que the host disabled.
You're not able to share?
Isso.
Agora sim, Eduardo. Agora sim.
Now
Okay.
you are. Okay. Thank you.
Dá para ver? Apareceu a apresentação?
Yes. Now you can share the screen. Yes. It's okay. So, as you can see, I had to change the title. My dear organizers, I will ask you to please change to the subject position in variety of Portuguese. When we proposed this paper, in fact, our intention was to focus on the subject position of impersonal sentences in variety of Portuguese. And when I say impersonal, I mean sentences with unacusatives and raising verbs and whether verbs, existential verbs. This is what I mean when I say impersonal. I know it's not a general agreement using this for impersonal in the way we were planning. But so as to check the behavior of European Portuguese and the African varieties spoken in Mozambique and São Tomé and Príncipe, as they say in English. But then we had not analyzed definite referential subjects, nor indefinite. Mary mentioned indefinite. This is what I want to use. Indefinite subjects, either arbitrary or generic in these varieties, even though we did analyze them in European and Brazilian Portuguese. That's why we decided to begin from the beginning, showing you the African varieties comparing with European and Brazilian Portuguese, referential subjects. So the aims of this paper are to compare the inflectional paradigms of varieties analyzed: European Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, Mozambique, and São Tomé Portuguese, a relevant feature for the no subject parameter in the Romance group of languages. I agree with Mary that since Yegli and Safir, this is not relevant for no subject parameter in general. But we must agree that as regard concerning the inflection, the no subject, the Romance languages, the inflectional paradigm plays an important role. And we have evidence from French in the past and from the Dominican Spanish in the present. So we also want to present the results for definite reference subjects and for indeterminate. I will prefer indefinite next time, following Egerland's 2003. Egerland, in fact, says impersonal, but he distinguishes arbitrary and generic subjects, a proposal followed by Holmberg and many other scholars. The important thing is that I don't call them impersonal because they project a subject, no matter how this subject is represented. But in Brazilian Portuguese, they are not only projected, but they are phonetically represented, preferably. The no arbitrary and no generic third person is not usual, as they make it seem. It's not when we count the data of speech. And finally, it was our intention to show some features that distinguish Brazilian Portuguese impersonal sentences from European and two African varieties, the ones we are examining here, even though this investigation is in course, and I doubt if I will be able to bring you some results today. So let's continue. Our theoretical framework. Eduardo?
Well, since we present an empirical analysis following the model of the theory of language variation change, using as a theoretical component the properties that characterize consistent null subject languages, it is important to emphasize that we are aware of some fair complaints according to which within variationist studies in syntax, there has been little discussion of what type of factors can affect the choice of variants or of how the particular factors are chosen for analyzing any given case. Typically, the factors chosen for entry into verbal analysis appear without extensive discussion, and it is not clear how, apart from the intuitions of the researcher, these are arrived at, or whether there are any constraints on what can be a factor here. We can assure you our structural factors come from some of the most important analyses concerned with the characterization of the behavior of no subjects in Romance, since Chomsky, Risi, Calabresi, among many more recent research. We are interested in the following aspects concerning plus no subject languages in the Romance group, particularly Italian and Peninsular Spanish. Number one, referential subjects are null when licensed and identified by inflection or co-reference. A distant antecedent or an antecedent with another function do not necessarily motivate an overt pronoun. If identification is not impaired, the null subject tends to be null. Even the subject of a postposed main clause will be null if its antecedent is the subject of a precedent adjunct clause. So C command is not the only requirement. Just like emphasis or contrast, the turn shift, the reintroduction of the speaker in the conversation usually leads to an overt pronoun, as you can see in Marin's 2009. Plus, no subject languages do not have a system of a non-animate personal pronouns, and expletive subjects are null. This is how the avoid pronoun principle is obeyed. The data come from samples recorded by Projeto Comparaport, estudo comparativo de variedades africanas, brasileiras e europeias do português, with interviews including 36 speakers born in Rio de Janeiro, 36 in Lisbon, 18 in Maputo, stratified according to age, school level, and gender. The 17 interviews for São Tomé e Príncipe belong to the sample VARPOR, variedades africanas do português. The social stratification is the same. A missing interview is due to the fact that a woman with graduation belonging to the older group was not located. Sentences expressing contrast or emphasis, which must show an overt pronoun, and the second member of coordinated structures with the same subject, which may have a null subject in non-null subject languages, have been excluded. The linguistic factors chosen for entry into Goldvarb X multivariate analysis include person, inflectional verb paradigm, the structural patterns according to the function of the antecedent, and the syntactic structure, the structure of CP, and the cluster of semantic features of third person reference. The social factors consider age, years of school attendance, and gender. For Mozambique and São Tomé and Príncipe, the status of Portuguese first and second language, and the frequency of use and contact with Creole languages have been also considered.
Okay, and before we go to the results, we have to show you again the nominative and verbal inflectional paradigm that you already know. It was shown in other works. And speaking of Brazilian Portuguese, we have to show that our paradigm was impacted by two important changes, impacted the pronominal, our system of inflection. First, two cases of apocope with the apocope of S, second person singular, tu trabalhas, due to contact, certainly due to more than 300 years of contact. This case of apocope equals tu trabalha with third person, ele trabalha. And the other case of apocope affects third person plural, eles trabalham. The diphthong on, orthographically am, this diphthong has been reduced. The glide has disappeared, and so it is also, if this variation is attested, it equals the third person singular and tu trabalha second person singular. So the other change, important, very important change, Mary already mentioned, was the introduction of two new pronouns. The first, você, coming from the nominal expression, an address form, Your Grace, Vossa Mercê, which, as its origin of an address form, uses the verb in the third person. So, você trabalha entered in the system in competition with tu trabalha. Same form in Brazilian Portuguese. And the apocope here is not, in any case, subject to stigma, but in the third person plural, it is. And the other new pronoun is a gente, first person plural. It's like French on, exactly like French on. On parle français très bien. And it entered in competition with nós. And nós has a distinctive ending. And a gente, due to its nominal origin, has no inflection. Third person, zero inflection. So our paradigm, in fact, has outnumbered, has less oppositions than a functionally rich paradigm using Robert's terms. On the other hand, European Portuguese keeps pronoun nós as preferential. And você is a very strange pronoun in European Portuguese. According to Lopes and Brocardo, 2016, in the Handbook of Portuguese, they say that você and a gente are not fully grammaticalized in European Portuguese. That's why a gente is still used as a nominal expression. The people from the city, a gente dessa cidade doesn't like to work. And you work is felt as rude. You have to omit the pronoun. So the number of oppositions in European Portuguese is larger than the number of oppositions in Brazilian Portuguese. As for São Tomé and Mozambique, what we have is interesting. It's that they have, one moment, São Tomé and Mozambique have also the agente, the pronoun agente, but they prefer, nós, largely prefer. And the use of você is also in competition with tu, but they usually do not express the pronoun, just like in European Portuguese. So I would say that the paradigm of São Tomé and Mozambique is closer to European Portuguese paradigm, except for one thing. We noticed that in São Tomé, third person plural also has the reduction of the diphthong ão with a regular frequency. It's not so impressive, but they have this kind of diphthong, the loss of the diphthong, the reduction of the diphthong. So the results, the general results we have for the four varieties, Eduardo, are no subjects versus overt subjects, 64 in European Portuguese, 56, 53, Mozambique Portuguese, and in Brazilian Portuguese, the overall rates are 24%. We promised to show Mary if there is an element before these 24 new no subjects. If we consider the first, second, and third persons, you will see that European Portuguese and São Tomé Portuguese and Mozambique Portuguese show a more regular distribution, except for first and second person in Mozambique Portuguese. And they use você a lot, but tu still has the inflection. In Brazilian Portuguese, we could say that 20% for first person, 10% for second person, and 28% for third person are really a case of residual no subjects. Second person is concluded. I will tell you so before, after that. So now let's analyze what Eduardo showed you. What is the structural pattern for third person no subjects? We are interested in third person. In European Portuguese, if you have C-command relation or non-C-command relation, you have almost categorical no subjects. So Mary said she was happy, and when Mary entered the room, began her speech. So this is not the syntactic adjacency may not occur. The effect is the same in a well-behaved no subject parameter of the Romance group. In an adjacent clause, the antecedent is a subject. Mary arrived, said she was happy. So we have 78%. If an antecedent is in a different function, it doesn't matter. But see that even in such an unfavoring context, we still have no subjects. And if you compare São Tomé and Mozambique Portuguese, you see that C-command and anti-C-command relation lead to more than 60%, adjacent clause 60%, Mozambique 80%, 87%, 72%. Now look at Brazilian Portuguese. In C-command relation, the only one that Homberg and Chiran show that are the contexts where a third person subject is possible. In Finnish, they say it's possible, but we don't know how much possible they are. In Brazilian Portuguese, they occur less than overt subjects in the preferential no subject context. In anti-C-command relation, this is the lost context. We have 11%. We are losing them, but we still find them. In the subject in an adjacent clause is also another context, 38%. A distant and a different function antecedent are now two of the other candidates to disappear first. So we are following the gradual disappearance of subjects. Now, when we consider the semantic features, which is the second most important factor selected by the logistic program we use, you see that I said no subject languages don't have a paradigm of personal pronouns with a feature non-animate. And in fact, in European Portuguese, you see that 100% of non-animate, non-specific subject, a house in the country, and more specific, 96%. So one important thing, European Portuguese began to develop a paradigm of non-animate personal subjects in Italian and in Spanish. So they tell us they are 100% no. Somebody has to tell me. But see, if you compare with Mozambique Portuguese and with São Tomé Portuguese, they rarely use an overt non-animate pronoun. And the rates are very high for no subjects. On the other hand, in Brazilian Portuguese, since Mary showed us in Mary Cato, 1999, we have 58% of no subjects with non-specific trace feature, and non-animate, more specific, already reach 42% of no subjects. So we are almost outnumbering overt non-animate subjects. So this is, we are showing two very crucial properties. C command and anti-C command antecedents do lead to a no subject, and non-animate referents lead to no subjects, which is not observed in Brazilian Portuguese anymore. So now let's see the arbitrary subjects. So I'm entering on the field of the indefinite subjects. Brazilian Portuguese.
Eugenia, 5 minutes left. Yeah.
5? Okay. Arbitrary subjects, 91% of they. Clitic C, 4%. And the no generic. Olha, on the television, speak a lot this. On the television, speak. They speak. So you see that we have only 4% of this no arbitrary subject. In European Portuguese, we don't attest the 0 no arbitrary subject. Only the clitic C and the third person plural usually no. So the 3 varieties of Portuguese, the 2 Africans behave the same way. Now, the generic subjects. The generic subjects, we prefer you, você, tu, 93%. If you don't have a dream, you are nothing. Clitic C, 3%, the dying clitic. And the no generic, I am sorry, but we have only 3%. And they are very much constrained by is needing of politicians more serious. And to drink must have an ocean, must be serious. So they are modals. And European, Mozambique and Saint Thomas, você and tu, and clitic C. No occurrences so far attested by the no generic and no arbitrary. So let's conclude. Eduardo, no, impossible.
Okay.
I was going to tell you about the existential and others, but our results confirm that Brazilian Portuguese has a very different behavior when compared to European Portuguese, and that the 2 African varieties analyzed are much closer to European Portuguese, as far as referential subjects are concerned. In fact, Brazilian Portuguese shows a system moving to no subject language, and it does not seem to fit the group of partial no subject languages. No subjects can still occur in every context, even though the resistant environments are exactly the strongest inconsistent no subject languages like Italian and Peninsular Spanish. But we still license no subjects in root sentences, just like in embedded ones. As for the African varieties, they still preferred no subjects, and the system of arbitrary and generic eclitics is very strong, contrary to what we see in Brazilian Portuguese. However, a very recent research about the anaphoric accusative complement, based on the same samples here presented, here analyzed, shows an impressive similarity between the African varieties and the Brazilian Portuguese. I must tell Juanito Avelar the results for the no object in the African varieties. They reached 70 to 80%, just like Brazilian Portuguese. So subjects behave in a different way from objects. So therefore, subjects, I am not going to finish because I was going just to say a minute. 1 minute, Andres? Okay, I will,
yes,
1 minute. 1 minute. So Brazilian Portuguese is not a stable system, not at all. it's clearly moving to a no subject grammar. And it's clear that referential no subjects move to overt pronouns, but impersonal sentences, impersonal, which I did not mention today, pressed the parametric change, and the system found a solution to occupy spec TP, just as Mary showed today. A series of strategies have been documented, showing that such research has to be carried out to describe a system that created a paradigm of weak referential pronouns, and in the absence of an expletive, it finds a way to occupy spec TP, moving a prominent constituent, which cannot be attributed to an accident. Top prominent languages do not develop lexical expletives. This may be an explanation for the non-emergence of a lexical expletive in Brazilian Portuguese, contrary to what happened to French in the past and is happening to Dominican Republic Spanish in the present. Thank you very much. Sorry. Stay safe. This is Eduardo's idea.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes for questions.
No questions?
Yes, Michelle.
Thanks, that was wonderful. I just tried to look up the corpus and then, yeah, I wasn't aware of it. So it's a fantastic resource as well. I was going to ask one thing, it's kind of a comment in a way, but also a question. So a lot of, as I'm sure you probably know, a lot of the work that's been done on kind of heritage speakers of these kind of null subject Romance languages has also shown that they tend to start to use overt subjects more. I'm not sure if they've got as much detail on exactly where, where they use them, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in those contexts as well, and whether, because I think the picture's kind of similar, that they crop up more, but it's not like a kind of a sudden parameter change. It's kind of similar to what you're describing for Brazilian Portuguese in a sense. So I was wondering if how that would fit into the picture in a way. So I think it's been shown for attrition as well. So if, like, for example, it's Antonella Sirachi has shown that Italian speakers who've lived in another country for a long time start to use more overt subjects. Yeah.
In any case, I don't know if you quite understood you, but you can speak Portuguese to me as well, because your European Brazilian Portuguese is excellent. In any case, we analyze sociolinguistic interviews, and the results for Italian came from an analysis carried out by one of my students with Italian. And she found out, for instance, that when they are reintroduced in the discourse, they tend to use an overt I, io, invece, but I believe it is a strong pronoun. And the default is a no subject. But when you ask about our samples, if I understood you well, I'll tell you that our interviews are not so good to find everything we find in every day in the corridors of the university when we did go to the university. And the best examples, for instance, for an accusatives, for the no subject, the no arbitrary and generic, but the verb can be in first person. For instance, built a gas station on the corner, built on my corner, on the corner of my street. So you have this, but I don't know how frequent they are, because when you write sentences you hear, you do not write the ones which don't have a no arbitrary or generic subject. So we have our data with raising arguments to the subject position, like this forests rain a lot, are attested. March rains a lot, April rains a lot in Rio, I heard yesterday. So what was that you meant? Do you believe we had more no, generic, and arbitrary in Portuguese?
No, I mean, that is surprising, striking, and very interesting. But it was more a comment about the work that's been done with bilingual speakers, which increasingly shows again a kind of that they use more overt pronouns, but it's not in a particular. I mean, it's kind of across the board in a way. So it's similar. Again, it shows that it's, you know, it's this kind of similar result really to what you're describing.
Yes, bilingual speakers that we work with here at university, they use more overt subjects. But well, when Homberg especially mentions writing, the story is completely different. This is another story, because school, Mary and I showed this in the latest article, because school recovers, for instance, declitic C, which is about 3%. And this is real. This is real. The same as the no, arbitrary, and generic. And we have the C, generic, and the arbitrary C, both. So this is really in complete extinction. But in writing, there is a profusion of C. There is a profusion of no third person plural, arbitrary subjects. So, but at the same time, you can say that writing recovers all of them. It implements a lot of speech. So our writing today, in order to give students a description, you cannot use any longer old traditional grammars because they are completely false. Sorry if I didn't answer you.
Last question by Janaína.
Hi, Eugenia.
Hi, Janaína.
Just a data point. I agree with you that the generic no impersonals are modelized no impersons. I really agree with you. But they have an interesting property that somehow lead us to skip some data. So the modal verb doesn't have to be overt. So when you say something like é assim que faz doce, you are saying that this is the general way that people are supposed to make sweets. Or when you say quando vende a geladeira, which means when we are supposed to sell the fridge, you also do not have an overt modal. So if you look for modals, you will not find a lot of generic no impersonals. But if you look, if there's a covert modal reading, which is a property of infinitival sentence, but I will not talk about that. But if you look for a covert modal reading, you will find a lot more, especially in relative clauses and questions. That's it.
Maybe infinitival clauses, I really always think that the subject, the argument is suspended in most of the cases, even though we are usually expressing referential and impersonal, indefinite subjects. They are being expressed. It is not what you mean. But when you say, na praia, let me tell you an arbitrary subject. It's not generic. Na praia vende cachorro-quente. It's perfectly well, good, vende cachorro-quente na praia. This is, it's okay in Portuguese. Vende cachorro. I'm not included, you are not included because we are not doing this, we are teaching. So, na praia vende cachorro-quente. This is modal. This is an aspect. There is an idea of aspect, not modal. Aspect is here. But we have aspect in generic. When I was young, quando eu era nova, punha a mesa para tomar café, para tomar lanche. When I was young, set the table to have a breakfast. Set the table. We used to set the table to have a snack. When I was young.
Yeah, but my comment is, I agree with you all that you said about I call them existential impersonals. I have said in my work too. But what I was talking about generic impersonals, that they have properties that resemble infinitives. Not that they are infinitives, but they resemble infinitives in being modal. But this is another thing. So what I was saying is that if you don't look through the corpus, if you don't look for a modal to the corpus, but if you look for a covert modal reading, you will find more generic no impersonals. That was my point.
No, I'm not looking for a modal. The fact is that they appear. The other, I have all the sentences. I can also read them again, see if they have any modality.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That's
if
what
they
I
are
mean.
conveying modality.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
In fact, for instance, on television, you speak this a lot. This is aspect. But I will try to find. Yes, yeah. I will try to read them. And Eduardo is very good because he knows the sample by heart. He knows the sample by heart, all the samples, and we can analyze. I thank you for your suggestion to analyze all the no generic and arbitrary. Maybe we will find more, but I wonder.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Gracias, thank you. Thanks, muito obrigado a todos. Nos vemos a las 2. We see you again at 2 p.m. 2 Brazilian time, yeah.
With the same link.
The same link, yes.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock Brasilia time.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you later. Thank you. Eloise, I'll send you the paper by Ernestina. Thank you. So glad to meet you, Michelle, Professor Chiran.
Igualmente.
Thank you so much.
Obrigada pela palestra também.
Muito obrigada.
Tchau.
Tchau, tchau.